Now, we will learn from a panel discussion about connecting dots of cardiorenal metabolic syndrome, role of emerging therapies, including finerenone. Moderator, Dr. Rahul Jain. I request Dr. Rahul Jain to come up on the stage. Dr. Rahul Jain. Panelists are Dr. P.C. Mondal, Head of the Department, Interventional Cardiology, Apollo Multispeciality Hospital, Kolkata, Dr. Jayanto Datta, Consultant Nephrologist, Manipal Hospital, Salt Lake, and Dr. Joy Varghese, Gastroenterologist, Director Hepatology and Transplant Hepatology, Gleneagles Health City, Chennai. Duration of this session is 45 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the post-lunch session, we are delighted to have this panel discussion, connecting dots of cardiorenal hepatic metabolic syndrome and role of emerging therapies, including finerenone, a panel discussion. Can I have the next slide, please? So, unfortunately, we'll be missing our brilliant Dr. Ghanshyam Goyal sir. He's not available today, so I'll have to fill in for him. And we have three very distinguished panelists. To my immediate left is Dr. P.C. Mondal, who's a very renowned cardiologist. To my right is Dr. Jayanto Datta, who's a consultant nephrologist. And to my extreme left is Dr. Joy Varghese, who's a consultant hepatologist. Can I have the next slide, please? So, without much ado, as we are running short of time, we'll start the ball rolling. A few thoughts for the day for the audience. As you all know, the topic which we'll be discussing. So, are we sitting on a pile of missed opportunities? And does evidence translate into clinical practice in the outpatient department? And when we read so many papers and trials and journals, so what is lost in translation and what is not? So to set the context, we have recently learnt about the cardio-kidney metabolic panel, and there's a consensus and a growing resonance of voices to label it, expand it further and call it the cardiorenal hepatic metabolic syndrome. Why? Because there's a global resurgence of cardiometabolic mortality, increasing population. We are only 8 billion people on this planet, and the number of people who are aging is increasing, and with that we have a higher and higher burden of people who are succumbing to these lifestyle or these non-communicable diseases. And one of the problems which we encounter is that there's a fragmented care. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, managed by the endocrinologists. The nephrologists are managing chronic kidney disease. The hepatologists and the gastroenterologists are managing NASH or MASLD, whatever you might call it. And that leads to a lot of confusion and fragmentation, the siloing of care. And unfortunately, the AHA, although it branded this syndrome as heart-kidney metabolic axis, a very vital organ, the liver was omitted despite the huge role of MASLD, and the very, very large percent of people, 35% to my estimate, globally, some figures are showing 25 to 30%. And progression to MASH and cirrhosis is associated with an increment in the cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease and heart failure. And please let us remind ourselves that it's a bidirectional effect, and which is why it is necessary to have a holistic CRHM framework which incorporates not only the heart, the kidneys, the liver, but also the metabolic things into the framework. And there is this entire growing clamor and talk about how the organs crosstalk. We know that CRHM syndrome is a systemic disorder in which there is a parallel dysfunction of cardiovascular, renal, hepatic, metabolic symptoms driven by insulin resistance and meta-inflammation. Mechanisms are shared like the trunk of a tree. The heart has an effect on the liver, and the liver has an effect on the heart. The heart has an effect on the kidney, and the kidney has an effect, deleterious effect on the heart. So it's bidirectional. Whichever aspect, two aspects you pick. Cirrhosis is known to cause hepatorenal syndrome, and CKD worsens portal hypertension and fibrosis. And these are common threads: inflammation, oxidative stress, neurohormonal activation, whatever you want to call it. Now, a number of staging systems have been proposed. Stage 1, 0, where there are no risk factors. Stage 1, where there is simple adiposity, overweight, obesity, and prediabetes. Stage 2, where there's metabolic risk factors, early CKD, MASLD, F0 and F1. And stage 3, where there is subclinical cardiovascular disease or high-risk CKD, MASLD, F2 to F4. And stage 4, where you have clinical cardiovascular disease with or without end-stage renal disease, with or without cirrhosis. Now, a lot of therapeutic advances have come to the fore. We now have GLP-1 receptor analogs, dual GIP-GLP-1 agonists, SGLT2 inhibitors, finrenone, resmetirom, and a number of trials have shown that these therapeutic advances are actually yielding a lot of beneficial effects to people who are suffering from a number of these ailments. And we talked about how the kidney is a leading risk factor for the onset and progression of cardiovascular and kidney diseases together. 2 to 3 times the increased risk of cardiovascular diseases in patients with diabetes, worse heart failure symptoms, higher rates of people who require hospitalization, and obviously great reduction in the quality of life and survival. Now, CKD and type 2 diabetes, more than 35% of albuminuria in Indian diabetes patients is seen. There is a very strong association of albuminuria with chronic kidney disease and heart failure and CVD mortality, and 10 times higher prevalence of kidney failure in persons with diabetes when we compare in persons without diabetes. I'll skip that slide. And if you compare with healthy individuals, having CKD and diabetes can shorten life expectancy by 16 years. So the future implications, before I set the ball rolling: care remains siloed, and some tests are redundant. There is conflicting advice. We need integrated CRHM clinics with multidisciplinary teams, and we need unified holistic CRHM guidelines with integrated care algorithms, and we have to incorporate the liver as a very central and important organ in the pathophysiology of the CRHM syndrome. And we will discuss today about novel agents for multi-organ protection and dissolve specialty boundaries. So my first question would be to our Mr. Dr. Joy Varghese, to the hepatologist. The mention of liver was missing in the first position statement of AHA. However, we cannot ignore the pivotal role of the liver in the overall genesis and progression of CKM syndrome because of the shared pathophysiological mechanism. Do you advocate using MASLD in the mainstream axis models of CKM? And please give a probing and detailed reason for your views, please.
Thank you, sir. So, good afternoon to all. At the outset, my sincere thanks to the organizing team of the UponCon and Dr. Oja, who invited me for the session. So I'm basically a hepatologist, particularly transplant hepatologist. Before to answer this question, what I am seeing nowadays in our practice, so in our center we are doing more than 100 liver transplant in a year. Earlier days, 10 years ago, most of the patients will have alcohol-related liver cirrhosis. In the 2024, our data shows more than 50% of the liver transplant patient indication was NAFLD or MAFLD. So this is the one of the main concern. Second, our center used to do the liver resection for liver cancer. Again, the 10 to 15 years ago, mostly viral etiology related HCC we used to see. Nowadays, we are seeing almost all the explant histology comes cryptogenic in the background of MAFLD or NAFLD. So this is the main concern from our side. We used to see how rampantly, not only in our center, there are many literatures world level showing the epidemic, these alarming symptoms of the cryptogenic HCC, so far called, it is going and HCC. Now coming to the point, the CKM, the cardio kidney metabolic. This is what I gone through the literature because the American Heart Association literature wise, it has not been involved that liver component. But if you look into our own literatures also, so 20 years ago, no one talked about the fatty liver disease, the important. No one knows the natural history of the fatty liver, how it will progress, what are the pathways are involving, whether the inhibitors are there or not. And then now they changed it into the MAFLD because initially it was thought about hepatic manifestation of the metabolic syndrome, but now it's very clearly shows the fatty liver is the driver for the and the consequence of the all the complications, all the component syndromes. So basically it starts with insulin resistance and the overweight over the period of time before to get into the CKM, cardiac and kidney metabolic syndrome, the stages. So it shows the beginning stage. Here I wish to quote one of the journal, it's an American Journal of Preventive, here it's not so, the Preventive Medicine in 2025, it showed almost more than 10,000 the patients with obese and the diabetic patient has been followed up for 27 years. The median follow period was 27 years, and in the 27 years they put it to the different stages of CKM, CKM 0, CKM 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you look into that, even though CKM 0 stage almost more than 30% of the population is fulfilled the criteria for the MAFLD. So the progressively that percentage of the component of the not only the MAFLD, MASH and everything is keep on increasing, and whenever the CKM fourth stage is achieved, more than 2/3 of the groups have the underlying the MASH related the problem. So what it clearly shows, the liver will be the player of that, particularly the insulin resistant, whichever happened, and the adiposity related overweight, that it's starting stage and over the period of time it's going to the.
Just I would add one thing with this, Dr. Varghese, you have told well. The thing is that in 2023, this AHA coined the syndrome of CKM, cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome. They have omitted intentionally that liver component. As you have told, there is at least 15 to 20% of patients of this stage 0 CKM may have fatty liver. But that fatty liver in the early stage is not truly steatosis and may not invite fibrosis also. And if you go on to the stage 1, 2, 3, 4, progression of vascular disease and progression of parenchymal disease is not parallel. That means vascular damage once initiated may be relentless. You cannot stop it. You can retard it only. That means if I say I giving statin or other drugs, anti-obesity medications or hypolipidic medication, what I am doing? I am doing just keeping the internal milieu not in a burn, inflamed state, keeping it a calm, cool state. So that there will be some formation of plaque that should not rupture. And that will kill you. That is the thing. That there is a connotation in cardiology. We born with clean arteries, but living with plaques, but can die with a plaque rupture. The main idea was to keep this plaque calm and quiet and retard its progression. The what was going on discussion was there from 12 noon today, what I have heard for last 2 hours, 2.5 hours, was regarding all the anti-diabetic medications. But they are telling repeatedly cardiovascular outcome like this. That means to prevent death only. If we go back to our this staging slide, why this kind of syndrome is required? Is it at all helpful? The thing is that there is a stage 0. That means stage 0 means what? Nothing is there. A 5-year boy can be in the stage 0, an 11-year boy can be in the stage 0. What is the utility of this? The utility is school health programs, some community programs should catch those boys and girls, teach them to prevent and to incorporate bad behavioral as well as biological factors to be prevented. Don't become a smoker, don't gain weight, be active. Be active. What is the management of the stage 0? Essential life of 8. That is the connotation. Essential 8 for life. That is the treatment of stage 0. And this stage 0 also includes social determinants of health. Sitting in a metro city is easy to quantify health risks. You can go to your next door for a laboratory test or visit a doctor to have a lipid profile. You can calculate all the indexes. I will tell you what are the indexes that we calculate from the CBC and lipid profile also. But that social determinants of health includes ethnicity, risk factors like what was the birth weight of that boy or girl, whether he was IUG or baby, whether there is a catch-up growth in the toddler age. This stage 0 is the vital for this area. All the preventive programs should start at this age. In the higher secondary school level, they should learn how to live in the rest of their life. Otherwise, they will be a patient. And rest of it, 1, 2, 3, 4, this adiposity. This adiposity is, all adipose are diseased? No. It is not the total fat mass that is the thing. BMI, what is the BMI of a footballer? Their BMI will be very high because of very high muscle mass. That means this adiposity is a dysfunctional adiposity that should be considered. And that adipose tissue is an inflamed, active endocrine tissue. That's why the liver was initially not included because it was a parenchymal disease and it's not a vis-a-vis parallel, it goes from 0 to 4. And once there is a fibrosis is set up, I think Dr. Varghese will be agreed with me that fibrosis may go on increasing and that can land up in hepatocellular carcinoma also. That means there is a diversion after meeting with the risk factors, that means MASLD, there is a meeting point, but pathway may be different afterwards. But we can include this hepatic component also in these syndromes. So basic idea of this syndrome was to include or screen those boys who are at high risk of developing or entering into the stage 1, 2, 3, 4 and how to tackle them, how to teach them. That is a kind of preventive kind of connotation that has been coined.
Thank you. Sir, you have hit the ground running. I think I'll direct my next question to our nephrologist. Yes, beyond, I think a lot of it has already been discussed. Beyond cardiovascular disease, CKD is a major cause of morbidity in persons with type 2 diabetes. What are the main risks the population is facing and how can these be mitigated? What lifestyle and preventing and pharmacological strategies are most effective? And what are your thoughts on the agents like RAS1, SGLT2, Finrenone for managing CKD in persons with type 2 diabetes?
So good afternoon everybody. First I want to give big thanks to the organizer for giving me this opportunity. And there are 3 questions I am giving answer to the first question. First, that is what is the, basically it says what is the problem situation in India. So we are the highest populous country. We have 140 crores of population. I am giving the problem statement by numbers. There are different studies which wants to know what is the prevalence of CKD in India. In abroad, in USA, it is around 15 to 17%. In India, there is no large scale study. There is small study in different states. It varies from 7 to 8% to as high as 15 to 17%. So if you take an average of 10% of population who are suffering from CKD, CKD means not only decrease in the GFR, we have to take into account of the albuminuria. So if you taken into account of the increased albumin excretion and decrease in the GFR, and you take the average of 10% of patients are suffering from this CKD, that means we have 200 patients sitting in this room. I am pretty sure that if there's a 200 people, at least 20, maybe more, because the average of this population is little bit more, so are suffering from some sort of CKD. So in a 140 crores of people in our country, 14 crores people are suffering from some sort of renal dysfunction. Take the magnitude of the problem. And if you see these 14 crores, if you take now what are the pre-dialysis and the dialysis population, roughly we estimate every 4 pre-dialysis population there will be 1 dialysis patient. Why it is so? Because these pre-dialysis population are not lucky enough to reach the CKD stage 5 when they will need the dialysis, because before that they will die of the cardiovascular cause. Because the cardiovascular mortality is the main cause of mortality in the CKD population. So all the patients are not lucky enough to reach the CKD stage 5 when they will reach the dialysis. Before that, in CKD stage 2 or 3, they will die of some cardiovascular insult. So even if you see the 1/5 of the population is suffering, needs the dialysis, that means in your country, 3 crore people will need dialysis. In world, no infrastructure can provide that sort of dialysis to the 3 crore of population. So prevention is the ultimately aim. What my previous speaker is saying, that prevention. That is the only answer to this question, because we are facing in every dialysis unit, all the machines are filled up. There is no slot. And also the people are dying because of the lack of dialysis. So in a civilized country, and in our resource limited country, we cannot install so much machines. So we have to halt the disease, we have to delay the progression of the disease. So that is the main aim of this, arranging this seminar, how we can delay the progression, how can we halt the progression. So when we are student, say there is no molecule apart from AC inhibitor ARB which can specifically delay the progression of the disease. We control the lifestyle, we control the diet, you control the diabetic and the hypertension, that is all. We don't have any specific molecule which can delay the progression of this CKD. Now the molecules are coming up. There are, apart from the RAS inhibitor, now there are three pillars. There are three established pillars which can slow the progression of the CKD or diabetic CKD. One is RAS inhibitor, we all know, either is inhibitor or ARB. Number two is the SGLT2 inhibitor. First, it's come into the market as an anti-diabetic drug. But we have seen that it is also very much renoprotective apart from its anti-diabetic property. That's why now we are using this SGLT2 inhibitor in non-diabetic population also for delaying the progression of the disease. That is very important. We are using in the FSGS population, we are using in the IgA nephropathy group, and it is also used every approved indication of the dapagliflozin or empagliflozin that you can use this molecule in non-diabetic population to delay the progression of the diabetic disease. And number three, third addition, most recent addition is the finerenone. It is the three pillar, and apart from this you have to control sugar, you have to control pressure, lifestyle modification. By all these things measures, we are trying to retard, not halt. We cannot halt CKD progression, we cannot go back. Just with what we can do, we can delay the progression. That is the answer to, I have given the answer to the three questions.
Thank you. Because we are running short of time, can we have very brief answers? My question to my senior cardiologist colleague, what cardiovascular risk factors do you consider most important when evaluating patients at risk for CKM syndrome? And you've already answered the second one. How do you demand screening for cardiovascular disease in patients with metabolic disorders, MASH or kidney disease? Could you, if you could?
First of all, suppose a patient of 30 years presented to you with an BP of 140/90 and he is having impaired glucose tolerance. What will be your antihypertensive of choice? It is an antihypertensive drug will be prescribed or SGLT2 inhibitors? The present day answer will be SGLT2 inhibitors. Stage 1 hypertension, impaired glucose tolerance, obese, you can simply prescribe SGLT2 inhibitors. That is also a hypotensive drug. That can cause diuresis, that can cause natriuresis and control BP. And their sympathetic tone will go down after 6 to 8 weeks. That drugs can come down your system also. So from these three drugs, RAS inhibitor, SGLT2 inhibitor and finerenone, if you want to start as an antihypertensive, my choice will be SGLT2 inhibitor and finerenone if required first, and then the RAS inhibitors. Because SGLT2 inhibitors can bring down the BP also, particularly in those who are obese and with impaired glucose tolerance. And to my questions, first one was, what cardiovascular risk factors do you consider most important when evaluating patient at risk of CKM syndrome? Number one is the family history and his grown-up period of whether they are low birth weight baby or not, and obesity. Obesity, attainment of obesity at the teenage or after teenage. That means acquired obesity later on. That is very important. And regarding lipid profile, for Indian context, the lipid profile, usually we see the LDL level and HDL level and triglyceride. Here, The other two targets, LDL and triglycerides, are very soft endpoint. It can be easily controlled with drugs and your diet. But very difficult to control is to raise HDL. That's why whenever you are seeing a lipid profile, do a CBC also. Calculate two kind of risk factors. That can be done easily if you are acquainted. First of all, this TIG index, that will say you regarding, that is a log of triglyceride and fasting blood sugar divided by 2. Log 10, fasting blood sugar and triglyceride divided by 2. Next is the atherogenic index of your patient. That is triglyceride divided by HDL. Now, after seeing this, suppose a man is having only low HDL, what will you do? Do you prescribe something? Or LDL is borderline, up to 21 years boy or 25 years boy, LDL is 110, HDL 34, triglyceride is 150. Do you prescribe drugs? Next step will be to evaluate for inflammatory indices. Just go through the CBC. One is systemic immune inflammatory index, that will be calculated by neutrophil into platelet divided by lymphocyte. If that is high, and another is SIRI, that is what is the body response, systemic immune response, that will be calculated by monocyte into neutrophil divided by lymphocytes. If all these four, out of these four, any two is abnormal, then you have to go for statin even in a boy of 25, because his system is inflamed and atherogenic index is high. That means here, the CKM, after introduction of the CKM, guideline is going to be changed, and what is recent learning, we don't ignore of a teenage, suppose 19 years. My colleague can say that I have done one angiography of a 23 years lady who has presented with an MI just day before, and done an angioplasty just 1.5 months back in a 19 years old boy, acute atrial MI with cardiogenic shock. So age is not at all a factor. Here we have to calculate, seeing the lipid profile and CBC, calculate atherogenic index, calculate their inflammatory status. CBC and lipid profile. Don't see the lipid profile at an LDL level. The time has gone, we have to calculate all these risk factors. Regarding the second questions, do you recommend screening of cardiovascular disease in patients with metabolic disorders? Answer is yes, 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 yes. Because all CKM criteria has got some enhancing factors, risk enhancing factors of CKM syndrome, even in stage 0. What are those? Ethnicity is one. Indians are at high risk. Second, social determinants of health. If social determinants includes his financial status, his work availability status, work stay status, sleep status. If we include all these social determinants of health, we are at risk. That means not looking anything, not diabetic, non-hypertensive, everything, nothing is there. Just ethnicity and your social determinants of health putting you at risk. That means our black blood is black skin is stamped as black blood and we are at risk. That means all patients need screening. If the screening is before 21 years of age and after 21 years of age, that is bit different. Before 21 years, just look for obesity, blood pressure, family history, lipid profile, and calculate those atherogenic indexes and inflammatory indexes. But if it is more than 21, go for organ evaluation like cardiology will advise at least non-invasive carotid intima media thickness. And if required, calcium scoring also, CSE. Not putting any dye, we can take him to a CT scan and calculate the coronary artery calcium score, if more than 21 years of age.
Thank you for your very elaborate answer. Now my question again is to Dr. Verghese. Can the focus be given to liver by weight reduction or otherwise help in better management of CKM syndrome and improve outcomes? Please explain how. And do CKM and MASLD progress concurrently or they behave differently at some point of time? Now, obviously, they diverge at some point of time. So, is there some dissociation or incongruence, or they progress more or less in the same direction at the same speed?
The prevalence of the MAFLD in India varies from 9% to 59%. The epidemiological studies, which are the state is 9% comes mostly the hilly area and in the Andaman Nicobar, some other places. So, such a high prevalence, the disease, it's a very, very slowly progressive disease. Whatever the MAFLD will not lead to immediately either MASH or liver cirrhosis or liver cancer. Same way, the MAFLD will not go to the immediately all the cardio or kidney related, all the complications. So we know the pathophysiology, overweight plays a major role, insulin resistant. So the data are there more and more for lifestyle modification will revert back. But it's not in all the stages of liver disease. Same way, all other organ, it goes to the end organ damage, it will become irreversible. So the initial phase completely is reversible. Lifestyle modification means the diet. Now the recommendation is the less carbohydrate diet and the regular exercise. That time the data shows the reversibility of the fatty liver, because we can use nowadays the FibroScan, routine ultrasonogram, it will be more and more observer variation will be there, grade 1, 2, 3. FibroScan, it will show some numbers. From that, using the CAP, fatty component we can assess, and at the same time fibrosis grade also. But it is not equal to the gold standard technique of liver biopsy, but it's almost more than 70%. It's a sensitivity with that liver biopsy. The fibrosis once settles, then it is difficult to revert back. That time the drugs will play a major role. There are so many drugs are in pipeline and already in our market also, F1 fibrosis, F2 fibrosis. So why similarly, if you look into that cardio and kidney metabolic syndrome, the recent literature 2025 published, the Korean literature also shows there is one, I am quoting the Korean literature because they studied the long period, almost more than 10-year follow-up. Rest of the things are the follow-up period was less, and the large volume, almost 46 lakhs of patients, they have been followed up. So that it shows the significant reduction of that cardiovascular morbidity and all-cause mortality by this kind of the groups, by the weight reduction and the lifestyle modification. So lifestyle modification play a major role, not only reverting back the fatty liver component and also the cardiovascular as well as the overall the mortality related to the disease.
Thank you. We are running short of time. We have only 8 minutes left. So I would request the panelists to give brief answers. So how do you approach, my next question is for Dr. Dotto. How do you approach diagnosis and management in patients with mildly reduced EGFR or early albuminuria? And what modifiable factors most strongly influence progression at this stage? Very briefly, sir.
Okay. Coming to the diagnosis of the albuminuria, the common mistake we generally do. So, some patient is coming in our OPD, we say value of urinary ACR maybe 90 or 100, we stamp that the patient is suffering from the microalbuminuria. But the diagnosis of the albuminuria has definite criteria. First of all, patient has to be you have to also send urine culture. If the patient has infection, it will increase your albuminuria. If is patient suffering from some sort of fever or infection, it will increase albuminuria. If patient smoke just before giving the urine sample, if patient jogs or runs to your clinic and give the sample, so that is the erroneous albuminuria. So commenting on albumin excretion, you have to be sure that patient is giving urine in the ideal situation. And to diagnose albuminuria, you have to repeat urinary ACR 3 occasions, 6 weeks apart. If 2 samples is positive, then only you can say that patient is suffering from albuminuria. So this is the diagnosis. And coming to the eGFR, what we usually mistake, we estimate GFR when the patient is admitted for some sort of complaint in the hospital. Say some patient is suffering from infection. His creatinine is not stable at that part. So you have to measure eGFR in a stable renal function state, not in an acute state. That is another common mistake we do measuring when we do eGFR estimation. So otherwise it is very simple. So maximum lab, if you say in your prescription serum creatinine with eGFR, it is basically app-based or formula-based GFR calculation, and you should do in your practice. I am 100% sure in your clinical practice, 100% are not measuring this eGFR. We are only measuring the serum creatinine. Make it a habit. When you advise creatinine, please mention with eGFR. Because all the treatment protocol, all the everything is based on the eGFR, not on the serum creatinine. So these are the 2 fallacies, common fallacies when we measure eGFR and microalbuminuria. And coming to the modifiable risk factors, the main thing is that though the protein intake, we are very apprehensive that patient has to restrict protein intake. I am giving you the fallacy. This protein intake is basically true for the Western population where they take a lot of protein. In Indian population, what is our usual diet? It is maximum 1 gram to 1.2 gram per kg body weight. We are not consuming protein in the range of 1.5 to 2 gram like Western. So be careful. Be careful when you advising the restricted protein in the population. We have seen a lot of, and also patients are also some sort of panic. They self-restrict their protein intake because they are saying my creatinine will stay at, but what happened we are seeing, they are suffering from tuberculosis. They are suffering from malnutrition. They are suffering from some other complication due to this restricted self-imposed or doctor-imposed restriction of the protein. So just I am giving you the practical thing. Don't restrict protein so much that patient is got into the protein energy malnutrition. And the second point is that when you calculate, there are 3 misconceptions about this protein. Second is that body weight. Which body weight? Ideal body weight. If the patient is already malnutrient, you cannot take that body weight. You have to calculate the ideal body weight depending upon her height and age. And so you have to also give that protein into the consideration. So you have to be measured on the ideal body weight. Please.
Thank you. We are really running short of time. A very quick retort from my senior cardiologist colleague. How does early kidney damage impact cardiovascular risk? Just points. And what role do biomarkers such as troponin or natriuretic peptides play in assessing cardiovascular risk in patients with early kidney disease, sir?
I am going from below up. What role that this biomarker plays? Actually, most of the time we see the biomarker troponin, HS troponin and HS-CRP, high sensitive CRP, and troponin S or troponin T or troponin I. Out of all these, the thing has moved to ST2. It has got 2 fractions, one is transmembrane and one is soluble. And this soluble ST2, that also reflect cardiac stress, because NP, BNP or NT-proBNP has so many things that even obesity will give a fallacious low result. If the patient is having an early CKD, there may be some volume congestion that can give a false impression. That is more specific markers out of this troponin and your natriuretic peptide, this soluble ST2. And this soluble ST2 has got a reflection of internal milieu also, because it is the binding site for interleukin 33. That is the most specific vascular inflammatory marker over and above TNF alpha and interleukin 6. So based on these biomarkers, my preference will be in future also this soluble ST2 over and above this troponin and natriuretic peptide. Regarding the first question, how does early kidney damage impact cardiovascular risks and what strategies be employed to mitigate these risks? If it is a diabetic, control diabetes, and control hyperinsulinemia, that is the main driver. Hyperinsulinemia is the main driver of all these vascular pathologies. Because hyperinsulinemia means your beta cell has to produce more insulin. And beta cell insulin means it is a polypeptide. Polypeptide means it has got a tertiary structure. That means after synthesis, it should be modified in the endoplasmic reticulum. After synthesis, endoplasmic reticulum will modify it. And that modification will be endoplasmic reticular trace. Endoplasmic reticular trace will fight with your body up to a certain mark. After that, it will start leaving some of the insulin unfolded. And that unfolded protein response will impact your all organ damage. That means early CKD, no cardiovascular risk factor, I will assess for insulin resistance first and assess the hyperinsulinemia and treat that area. Treat that area. That is the prime target of the first question, how to retard this vascular disease progression, prevent hyperinsulinemia, because it is an endoplasmic reticular trace, and that trace will be modified to generate reactive oxygen and reactive nitrogen species, and that will cause endothelial dysfunction and vasomotor instability and on progression of atherosclerosis.
I think
We can take 5 minutes from authority, because the last, this one is very important.
We'll go for a rapid fire round with our esteemed nephrologist.
So the number one question is, how do you manage cardiovascular disease in patients who are on dialysis, that is ESRD or kidney transplant? Look, for the ESRD patient, there's a very frequently cardiologist colleague refer to us whether we'll go for CT angio or conventional CT, because our clearance is needed. We have basically we follow a simple line of dictum. Your heart is first, then kidney, because if your heart is stopped for 3 minutes, you will go on. But if your kidney is damaged, you can survive on dialysis for a pretty long time. So for CKD patients who are on dialysis and who have on risk factor, it is mandatory to do cardiac checkup, not only ECG and echo or TMT. I think because these things is very, very common in CKD population, because we all know this in CKD stage 5, your bone loses calcium. There is osteoporosis, fracture in the bone, and this calcium is deposited in your vasculature. So it is reverse. Your calcium is not in the bone, your calcium is in the coronary arteries. That is the calcium scoring. So for CKD stage 5, if routinely I think we should do a cardiac screening, if needed CT angio or coronary conventional coronary angio, and do the plus if needed, because there is no risk, because we will do dialysis after this intervention. And for the transplant patient, yes, it is very, very important. There are two terms. One is called graft survival, means how much long your grafted kidney will last, and patient survival means how long the patient will survive. The most common cause of death in transplant population is the death with surviving graft. Means graft is surviving, patient is dying because of the cardiovascular cause, because they are taking immunosuppressant, tacrolimus, mycophenolate and steroid. These three drugs causing your lipid abnormality, your others cardiac risk factor is increased. So screening of the transplant patient is very, very important to increase the lifespan of the transplant patient.
One last question to our hepatologist colleague. Do you see overlap in fibrosis mechanisms in liver and kidney? And what are the antifibrotic agents that have cross-organ benefits? where do you place SGLT2, GLP-1 receptor agonist and finerenone?
Basic screening is the liver function test, and at the first time we have to rule out all other causes, because the simple fatty liver will not cause the LFT alteration or ALT elevation. If there is a ALT elevations is above the normal range, means we should rule out the all other causes of the ALT elevation, because some of the patient have associated alcohol consumption or some of the patient have associated autoimmune disease. We should rule out all the thing. Then we can take it's a diagnosis of MASH. Then we have to use the fibroscan to know what is the fibrosis stage. This is the basic. Then regarding the treatment point of view, at present we have to identify what are the risk factors or metabolic syndrome components are there. We have to correct it. And the drugs wise, at the FDA approved is the saroglitazar only. Even though there are many drugs are there, at present approved drug in point of liver side reversibility. Reversibility means histological liver reversibility based on the liver biopsy. That showed only by the saroglitazar. We have to continue for the minimum 2 years. So the other drugs, whatever today Dr. Mukherjee told, the semaglutide, everything, of course, so many drugs, whichever thing reducing the obesity, it is also parallelly reducing, showing the reversibility, but need more and more the trials are required.
All those are for vascular. For your parenchymal, I think saroglitazar is the drug, only drug available now. Regarding finerenone, that is definitely anti-fibrotic mineralocorticoid antagonist. Even your older generation, that were because of side effects and pharmacokinetics and dynamics is different, but this only finerenone has got strong anti-fibrotic effect. That is only vascular, not parenchymal. Parenchymal is still the saroglitazar is the only drug that can prevent or retard the fibrosis of liver. And also fibrosis of finerenone has got effect on kidney, the strong effect on kidney, because of microvasculature of the kidney is a dynamic organ. It is a separate dynamic organ beyond arcuate arteries. That means second order or third order division of renal artery has got a different biology, totally different biology. It is not a simple capillary. It is a different system of vessels.
Your comments, your closing comments, please.
Yeah, just I as a closing comment, just want to give this confidence trial, because we are now using separately empagliflozin and finerenone. So what will happen if we give these two molecules together? Do we have the slides? So if we do not have the slides, this is basically confidence trial. It's a 3-arm trial. One is only finerenone, one is only EMPA, and one is the combination of both EMPA and finerenone. And it is shown that if we use EMPA and finerenone both, there is more than 30%, yes. This is more than 30% risk reduction compared to the, if you use that molecule alone. And it has also been seen that there are some adverse effects of finerenone, mainly hyperkalemia, is less if you combine these molecules together. So if you combine these molecules together, there will be more benefit in respect of the urinary ACR reduction and also reduction of the progression of the increase in the EGFR, and vis-a-vis the adverse effects will be less. So these three pillars, RAS inhibitor, your finerenone and empagliflozin, these are the three pillars, strong pillars, and maybe the fourth pillars, that is GLP-1 is coming up. This will reduce this so-called CKM progression and increase patient benefit.
Okay, I would like to thank everyone for being present. I think we'll wrap up our session, but I can assure you whether the kidney, the liver and the heart talk to each other, but here we had the kidney who was talking to the heart and the heart was talking to the kidney, and so we had the very nice organ crosstalk. And thank you very much, organizers, for this. I think your slide has come up. Would you like to?
Already said that it's a 3-arm study. One is only finerenone, one is empagliflozin, and is the combination. Give the result. Next one. You see the green one is the combination. Green line, and the above is the single molecule. You see that the more than 30% decrease in the USR, everything. Next one. So this is the early reduction in UCR, which was significantly greater than with either agent alone, and additive reduction in urinary ACR up to 52% if you combine both. Okay, so this is the main thing I want to highlight.
Thank you, organizers. Thank you to the audience, and thank you, everyone.